Judge Prescott thought a fine would silence Pam Bondi. He never expected her to dismantle his entire argument, right there in his own courtroom. It was a typical morning at the courthouse in Tampa, Florida. The halls had seen their fair share of legal battles, but no one could have anticipated the storm that was about to unfold. Pam Bondi entered through the heavy wooden doors, sharp and composed. Briefcase in one hand, she adjusted the lapel of her blazer with the other. This was supposed to be a routine hearing, something she could argue in her sleep. But even before she reached the defendant's table, she felt it, the weight of Judge Alan Prescott's gaze. Prescott, known for his strict no-nonsense demeanor, wasn't looking at her face. His eyes were locked on the gold cross hanging just below her collarbone. The air in the room grew still. Then, with a voice as crisp as a gavel strike, the judge leaned forward. "Ms. Bondi, I must remind you, religious symbols have no place in my courtroom. Remove it or face a fine." Pam didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Your Honor, my cross is no different than a wedding band or a photo locket. It's personal, not political." Prescott's expression didn't change. "That's not how I see it," he replied coolly. "Either take it off, or I'll issue a fine for violating courtroom neutrality." There was a faint murmur in the gallery. The bailiff shifted in place. The clerk exchanged a glance with Pam. No one had ever seen a judge try to assert control like this, especially over a necklace. Still, Pam didn't move. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I won't remove it." And just like that, she was fined. Not for misconduct, not for breaking procedure, but for wearing a piece of jewelry. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the principle. She folded her hands over her briefcase, eyes steady. "Before we proceed, I'd like to formally address this issue," she said. Prescott raised an eyebrow. "This is a business dispute hearing, Ms. Bondi, not the place for personal grievances." She stayed calm. "And the First Amendment doesn't take a recess just because it's inconvenient." That made him pause. The room was silent, tense. This wasn't just another hearing anymore. Pam Bondi had just challenged a sitting judge, right, to his face. "You're fining me for wearing a cross," she said. "Let's examine that legally." Prescott rubbed his temples, exasperated, but Pam was already reaching into her briefcase. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table with careful precision. Every movement was deliberate. Every second of silence turned up the heat. "Ms. Bondi, I don't have time for theatrics," Prescott muttered. "Neither do I," she replied evenly. "But I do have time to uphold the Constitution." He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together, bracing himself. "You claim my necklace disrupts courtroom neutrality," I ask. "What legal precedent are you basing that on?" The room held its breath. "This courtroom operates under my authority," he said slowly. "It does," Pam agreed. "But that authority isn't above the Constitution." She tapped the paper before her. "Under the First Amendment, personal religious expression is protected, especially when it does not disrupt court proceedings." Prescott scoffed. "You're a lawyer, not a law professor." Pam's smile was razor sharp. "Then let's talk case law." She lifted the paper. "Tinker vs. Des Moines, 1969. She let the name hang in the air. A landmark ruling. It established that individuals do not shed their constitutional rights at the door of a government building, whether it's a public school or a courtroom. Prescott's jaw tightened, and for the first time that morning the judge seemed unsure of what to say next. He knew that case. Everyone in the legal field did. But Pam didn't stop there. West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, 1943. She continued without missing a beat. The Supreme Court ruled that forcing someone to hide or remove symbols of personal belief is a clear violation of the First Amendment. She gently set the paper down and looked straight at the judge. "Now, Your Honor, would you like me to continue, or would you prefer to reconsider that fine?" Judge Prescott's fingers began tapping against the armrest. He was cornered, and he knew it, but his pride wasn't ready to surrender, at least not yet. "This is not a religious debate, Ms. Bondi," he said tightly. Pam tilted her head. "Then why did you make it one?" A few quiet gasps rippled through the courtroom. Prescott's face darkened, his voice sharpened, but the authority behind it was slipping. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Pam said, leaning forward, calm and unshaken. "I'll stop when you provide a legal justification for this fine, because so far I haven't heard one." A long, heavy pause. Finally, the judge turned to the clerk. "Mark the fine as pending review." Pam allowed a small, knowing smile. "I'll take that as a temporary victory." But she wasn't finished. Not even close. The real fight was just beginning. Prescott's face stayed unreadable, but he shifted in his seat. He had expected routine compliance. What he got instead was a full-blown constitutional challenge. The room was no longer just tense, it was electric. Pam could feel it. Every eye in the courtroom was locked on her. She had drawn a line in the sand. Now the judge had two options: double down and risk embarrassment, or backtrack and lose control. But Prescott wasn't the type to retreat easily. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his tone now slower, measured. "Courtroom rules exist for a reason. If I allow one form of personal expression, I open the door to all of them." Pam's lips tightened. "You mean like the wedding rings worn by half the attorneys in this room? Or the lapel pins on public officials you allow without objection?" Prescott's jaw clenched. Pam didn't stop. "Or the defense attorney you let wear a pink ribbon for breast cancer awareness during a trial? That didn't seem to violate your neutrality." Murmurs stirred among the observers. Prescott's glare shot toward them, but it was too late. Pam had exposed the double standard. She leaned back, arms crossed. "So tell me, Your Honor, why does this rule only apply to my cross?" Prescott's hand curled around the edge of his desk. He was trapped, and the entire courtroom knew it. He had enforced an unwritten rule based not on law but on personal bias, and now that rule was unraveling. For the first time since the hearing began, he had nothing to say. Pam didn't need to gloat. She let the silence linger, long enough for everyone to absorb the moment. Then she delivered the final blow. "If you stand by this fine, Your Honor, I'll be filing an appeal before the ink even dries. And when I do, this case will make headlines." She paused just long enough. A sitting judge fining a woman for wearing a cross in court. I'm sure the higher courts would love to weigh in on that. Prescott's nostrils flared. His ego battled against the cold weight of reality. Pam held his gaze unblinking. The longer he delayed, the worse it looked. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled sharply. "The fine is rescinded," he muttered. Pam smiled. "Much appreciated, Your Honor." But this wasn't just about a fine anymore. She had sent a message, one that Prescott and everyone else in that courtroom would not soon forget. The fallout, however, was only just beginning. The judge's words, "The fine is rescinded," should have closed the matter. But the courtroom wasn't just a venue for justice anymore. It had become a stage. Everyone knew they had witnessed something that would echo far beyond these walls. The court reporter didn't even lift her head, but her fingers never stopped moving. This transcript would circulate. That much was certain. The clerk who had looked uneasy when the fine was first issued now stole a subtle glance at Pam, almost impressed. Prescott shifted in his chair, straightening papers like he could somehow smooth over the moment. But Pam knew better. This wasn't something he could erase. Silence blanketed the room once more. She calmly adjusted her blazer, the small gold cross still resting where it had always been, untouched, unmoved. She had won. But this couldn't be just a personal victory. It had to mean something more. Turning to her client, a middle-aged business owner and the actual reason they were all there, Pam gave a slight nod. The real case was about to begin. But everyone knew the courtroom had already witnessed its most powerful argument of the day. The man gave her a nod, barely concealed but unmistakable. A nod of respect formed in his expression, quiet but firm. His confidence in Pam wasn't just intact, it was growing. Pam knew this moment wasn't about her anymore. Outside the courthouse, The reaction was swift. A reporter who had been covering an unrelated case in the same building caught wind of what had unfolded in Prescott's courtroom. Within the hour, a local news site published a headline that quickly began to spread. Florida. Judge attempts to fine attorney for wearing a cross, but it doesn't go as planned. Pam's phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Colleagues, former classmates, journalists. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. But Pam wasn't chasing headlines. She wasn't interested in media spins or Twitter threads. Her focus was already on the bigger picture. This couldn't remain a one-off confrontation. It needed to go further. She wasn't naive. Cases like this, moments like this, created ripples, whether she intended them to or not. Because this wasn't just about one judge in one courtroom. This was about setting, or preventing, a precedent. Would other judges follow Prescott's lead? Would attorneys begin to second-guess their personal expressions, opting to hide symbols of faith or identity just to avoid conflict? Would this moment embolden others to weaponize neutrality in a way that silenced belief? Pam wasn't going to let that happen. By evening, the story had already taken on a life of its own. A well-known legal commentator brought it up on a national conservative news panel. On social media, debate flared. Some rallied behind the judge's authority, while others praised Pam's quiet defiance as a powerful stand for constitutional rights. Pam sat in her office, watching the conversation unfold on her screen. A producer from a major network had already reached out, requesting an interview. She exhaled slowly, rubbing at her temple. She'd spent years fighting for her clients, cases with millions at stake, careers on the line. But this felt different. This wasn't about corporate law or criminal defense. This was about personal freedom, and whether that freedom could be erased on the whim of a single judge. But Pam knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Even as she had left the courtroom that afternoon, she had felt it. The way Judge Prescott looked at her just before dismissing the session. The fine may have been rescinded, but there had been something in his eyes, an unspoken warning, a promise that this wasn't finished. Pam had expected some fallout, a few emails, maybe a couple of phone calls. What she hadn't expected was how fast it would all escalate. By the time she walked into her office the next morning, her assistant Lauren was already waiting, eyes wide, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," she said. Pam took the device, scanning the screen. The Florida Bar Association had released a statement. It was carefully worded, neutral in tone, but the implications were clear. Judges have the right to maintain decorum in their courtrooms. While attorneys are afforded personal expression, it is important to respect the roles set forth by presiding judges. We trust our judicial system to navigate these matters with fairness and integrity. Pam let out a long, slow breath. This wasn't just commentary. It was a warning. Respect the roles set forth by presiding judges. That wasn't general advice, it was a signal, a quiet alignment. Prescott was already pulling strings. She set the tablet down. "When did this come out?" "An hour ago," Lauren said quietly. Pam wasn't surprised. The legal community was tight-knit. Word traveled fast, and Prescott clearly wasn't taking this lightly. But Lauren wasn't done. "There's more," she said, hesitating. Pam looked up, face unreadable. "Go on." Lauren handed her another document, this one printed. Pam skimmed the first few lines, her pulse steady, but her thoughts racing. Attorney Pamela Bondi conducted herself in a manner that disrupted courtroom proceedings, challenged judicial authority inappropriately, and engaged in behavior unbecoming of an officer of the court. Pam gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Unbecoming," she muttered. "That's rich." Lauren sighed. "It's retaliation, pure and simple." Pam leaned back, fingers tapping the armrest. Prescott wasn't just angry. He was laying the groundwork, trying to flip the narrative. He'd lost control in his courtroom, and now he was using the system to reassert it. This wasn't about procedure anymore. It was about power, and Prescott had just declared the next phase of the fight. He was no longer the judge who had overstepped his authority. Prescott was recasting himself as the victim, the one who had been disrespected in his own courtroom. And Pam? He was determined to frame her as the reckless attorney who challenged him simply for the sake of confrontation. Pam had seen this tactic before. It was textbook damage control. Flip the script, turn the accuser into the accused, bury the real issue beneath procedural noise and bureaucratic distraction. But Pam wasn't about to let that happen. "What's the process on this?" she asked, already shifting into strategy mode. Lauren exhaled. "You have 10 days to respond. If it moves forward, they could launch a formal review." Pam nodded, slowly. "And who oversees that review?" Lauren hesitated. "A panel. Judges and senior attorneys." Pam almost smiled. If Prescott thought he could drown her in red tape and behind-the-scenes pressure, he had miscalculated, because this wasn't going to be handled quietly. This was about to go public. Lauren watched her carefully, waiting for Pam's next move. "What do you want to do?" Pam took a deep breath, then reached for her phone. "If Prescott wants to play games," she said, scrolling through her contacts, "then let's play." He expected her to retreat, accept a closed-door reprimand, protect her reputation, and move on. What he didn't understand was that Pam didn't back down. She played the long game. And now, she was going to make sure everyone was watching. She didn't hesitate. Retaliation thrived in silence, in shadows. Prescott wanted this to stay quiet, his attempt to use the system against her without drawing public scrutiny. But Pam wasn't giving him that luxury. She found the name she needed, tapped the call icon, 2 rings. Then a familiar voice. "Pam, I was just about to call you. Lisa Reynolds, a veteran journalist with the National Legal Affairs Program. She'd covered some of Pam's most high-profile cases, and more importantly, she wasn't afraid of calling out judicial abuse." Pam got straight to it. "Lisa, I need you to listen carefully. A judge just filed a formal complaint against me for disrupting court proceedings. But what really happened? He tried to fine me for wearing a cross. When I stood my ground, he backed off. And now he's using the system to punish me." There was a pause. Then Lisa exhaled sharply. "You're telling me a sitting judge is trying to sanction you because you pushed back against an abuse of power?" Pam smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Lisa didn't miss a beat. "I'm running it." "I need it on record," Pam said, her voice steady. Before they twisted into a quiet disciplinary matter, Lisa was already moving. "You'll have a segment by tomorrow. I'll get legal analysts on, ones who won't sugarcoat this." Pam hung up, feeling the first shift of momentum. She turned back to Lauren. "Draft a public statement. I want to make my position clear before Prescott and his allies get a chance to cloud the waters." Lauren nodded. "Do you want to frame this as judicial overreach?" Pam shook her head. "I want to frame it exactly as it is. An attack on personal rights and a misuse of judicial authority. If he's willing to go this far with me, imagine what he's done to people without a platform." Lauren's jaw tightened. "I'll get it done." Pam leaned back, exhaling slowly. Prescott had counted on silence, but now the entire country was about to hear the story he tried to suppress, and she didn't have to wait long. By the time Pam sat down with her morning coffee, her phone was already buzzing nonstop. Lisa's segment had aired overnight. The story had exploded. The headline was everywhere. "Florida judge attempts to punish attorney for wearing a cross. Now he's under fire." And it wasn't just conservative media. Legal experts from across the spectrum, liberal, centrist, and everything in between, were weighing in. A constitutional scholar from Georgetown appeared on live TV, eviscerating Prescott's rationale. "This is judicial overreach, plain and simple. There is no legal foundation for penalizing religious expression in this context." A well-known attorney posted a viral thread dissecting how Pam's stand had exposed a dangerous precedent, one that demanded national attention. And then, finally, it came. The statement Pam had been waiting for. The Florida Judicial Review Board announced that due to significant public interest, It would be reviewing Judge Prescott's conduct to determine whether his actions violated judicial ethics. Pam leaned back in her chair, a slow breath escaping her lips. This was no longer just about her. This wasn't just about Pam anymore. It was about every attorney, every defendant, every single person who had ever stepped into a courtroom and wondered, can my rights be erased with the stroke of a judge's pen? Lauren walked in, holding up her phone. You're going to want to see this. Pam took it and pressed play. There he was, Prescott, standing outside the courthouse, cameras flashing in his face. His posture was stiff, his tone clipped. The statement was short. Too short for someone trying to defend himself. I have always upheld the integrity of this courtroom. The actions taken were in the interest of maintaining neutrality. However, I respect the judicial review process and will cooperate fully. Pam let out a dry laugh. Neutrality. He was still clinging to that excuse. Lauren crossed her arms. He's trying to save face. Pam nodded. And failing. Because this wasn't going away. The Judicial Review Board had a choice to make. And it wasn't just about Prescott anymore. If they ruled against him, it wouldn't be a simple professional embarrassment. It would be a precedent. One that protected attorneys like Pam, and everyone else, from ever being punished for standing their ground. But even if they didn't reprimand him formally, it was already too late. Prescott had lost what mattered most: his reputation, his credibility, his authority. Because from this moment on, every attorney who stepped into his courtroom would remember, this was the judge who tried to silence a woman for standing up for her rights, and lost. Pam took a slow sip of her coffee and glanced up at Lauren. We won. Lauren smiled. Oh, I know. Pam set her cup down, calm and steady. She hadn't just fought for herself. She had sent a message. Never let anyone in power strip away your rights without a fight. Because sometimes it only takes one person refusing to back down to change everything. If you believe in standing up for your rights, make your voice heard. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that matter.